Hey, welcome to the Profit Builder video series. I'm Vicki Suter, your host, and I'm the author of the book, The Profit Bleed, How Managing Margin Can Save Your Contracting Business. And these videos are all about helping you grow a more sustainably successful contracting business. And for over 25 years, I've been helping contractors increase their profits, generate more time in their day, and reclaim and refine the joy in what they do again. And that's what this video series is all about. And my goal is to help give you the thinking to be able to understand how to do that in your business. And then I actually give you tools and resources that help you implement what it is the video is talking about. So I hope you enjoy today's Profit Builder video.
Hey, Vicki, glad to have you on the show today.
Hey, Spencer, thanks. It's so nice to be here. I'm delighted to be talking with you.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty on team building and all that fun stuff. But before we get to that, I always think it's helpful, like, how did you get into the construction space and kind of this world that we're living in?
Well, it's kind of an interesting way that I got here. I was in banking and finance. I was a controller of a national training company. And at the time when I was doing that, I was married to a painting contractor. And I saw the challenges and the struggles that he had. And, you know, I worked with him and helped him with his business. And then when I had our son in 1990, I went, I decided I was going to stop working for somebody else 70 hours a week.
Sure.
I was going to start my own business. And
work for yourself 70 hours, right?
There you go. I was just about to say, and then I got to work for myself 70 hours a week.
Yeah, nice.
So I realized that there was something that I had to contribute given my finance background to the construction industry. And I knew that there was a place where I could contribute there. And my first client was a design build client. And I just found that I really loved the work, and I loved working with that, with contractors. And there's a complexity to it, but there's a simplicity to it at the same time that when you know how to tap into that, that really intrigued me. And so that is just the vertical market that I ended up staying with. And I ended up working with and do work with a lot of everything from remodelers to subcontractors to builders to interior designers.
Cool. Yeah. It seems like that's a common thread. A lot of people stumble into this industry, or, you know, it finds us, or whatever you want to call it. But I know one of the things that you're super passionate about, especially when thinking about these types of businesses, is team building. And I know when I first got into business for myself, team and culture and some of these things kind of felt a little bit like fluffy or pie in the sky, or kind of these ideas was like, how important is this? But obviously over the years I've discovered the importance of that. But why is this something that's so critical?
Well, if I were to kind of give you a little bit more about that story,
Sure.
When I worked for this international training company, I struggled myself as a manager and a leader. I really had a hard time. I thought that the way to get people to do things was manipulation and cajoling and threatening. And I was a horrible manager, really, as I look back at it. And when I first started hiring the first person in my practice, I found that it started to look a lot like it had looked before. And the training company that I came from was a transformational training company. So I knew enough at that point to go, if you have the same problem over and over again, you need to look at what the common denominator is. And I saw that it was me. And it was around that time that I was reading Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth.
Sure.
And I started reading books by people like Stephen Covey, and the wheels started to turn for me about, what am I doing as a leader and a manager to set people up to win with me? Have I set up the structure and the systems clearly? And, you know, beyond even that, I started to, and this is especially in the work in studying Stephen Covey, that I started to realize this whole other thing about human beings and about what makes us tick that I need to understand. And it's not about using people like tools, but it's more about how do you tap into people's greatest potential and how do you empower people? Because fundamentally, as human beings, our desire is to have a sense of belonging, mattering, and contribution. And that, during that time, it really started me on this whole journey of learning more about how does the human brain work. I became master certified in neuro-linguistic programming, which is a little bit about neuroscience, and it was based on neuroscience. And I started to really begin to understand that when we can tap into people's greatest potential and really understand what motivates and drives people, that we don't have to manipulate and cajole them, that what we actually can do is to help them rise up to their greatest level of contribution, value, belonging, and mattering. And so that has become, and I realized that that was one of the keys, that when I could help my clients unlock that, that was the key to being able to grow your business to the next level. That was the key to being able to spend less time working in your business. That was the key to building great teams and having great people want to come work for you.
Yeah. And so for those listening, they go, okay, that sounds awesome, maybe making that shift. How do you go about, actually uncovering what motivates or inspires people versus?
Yeah, it sounds a little fluffy, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, which I think a lot of times.
Yeah, sit down and have little meditation sessions with my team. No, not at all. Yeah. I'm a very pragmatic person, and I'm a very much a systems thinker. And one of the things that I realized at the time was, okay, often what I had, and I'll use an example of Beth, the woman who worked for me when I first started my business, when these lights started to go on for me, is that when she started working for me, what I gave her was a task list of tasks that she needed to do, which, when I ask people, do they have job descriptions? Or if you look online at job descriptions, 99% of the time, what you get is task lists. What they are not is holding people accountable and giving them accountability and responsibility for a result. And so I started to look at Beth and how I had set her up to be more like a helper than to somebody who actually could take ownership. And the distinction was I needed to write what I now call position agreements instead of job descriptions, because I hold them like they're agreements as opposed to just this thing that I gave you and said, here's what you're supposed to do. Sure. So it completely starts to transform that relationship from A, you're no longer a helper, you're accountable for a result, and B, this is our agreement and our contract with each other, and this is what we're holding each other accountable to. So now it starts to shift things at two different levels. One, I'm holding people as accountable for a result, not just the tasks to get to the result. And two, that now I'm in partnership with them about their ownership and their accountability for this agreement that we have. And I literally have people sign them. That starts to shift that relationship from a helper to a partner, to somebody who's about the commitment and the agreement that we have to produce these results. And that's so that's one of the first steps, is to start to make that distinction. And that's a very practical thing that people can do to start to look at, well, there's all these tasks. I'll give you an example in construction of a project manager. So if I'm talking about a project manager, I'm talking about their primary job is on time, on budget, as promised. And so I might have a job description right now that says things like you have to do client meetings, and you have to update schedules, and you have to stay in front of what's going on with the team, and you have so there might be all these tasks that the person
Sure.
has to do. But instead, if that job description or that position agreement says you're responsible for updating schedules every 2 weeks and going over that with the client and your manager or the owner, whoever, you're responsible for doing cost to complete every 30 days so that you know where a project is headed well in advance of the end result ever showing up. You're responsible for making sure that your team does 2-week look-aheads by the end of the day, every Thursday, on all the projects that you're working on. Now what I've started to do is that's a completely different position agreement. Now I have started to do what I call set SMART goals. Yeah, so they're specific, they're measurable, they're realistic, there's clear accountability, they're realistic, and they're time driven. So when they have all those elements, Now what you have is now what you've given your team is you've given them the ability to control what they do. And you've given them the ability to have a clear sense of contribution, belonging, and mattering, because you've given them the keys to the kingdom. You've shown them how to win the game with you. And again, I'm going to say this is a first step, right? So the first step is get clear about what constitutes being successful in that job, and codify it in a way that it's specific, it's measurable, there's clear accountability, it's realistic, and it's time driven. If you use that approach when you're writing position agreements with people, now you've given them the opportunity to rise up to owning and managing that result. And that's the key to clear account, that ability to be able to have a sense of belonging, mattering, and contribution, because now they're not just a helper in doing tasks. Now they have accountability for a result. And I'm going to say I've done this with clients with every position in their company. So this isn't just about leadership. It's also about the guy who's your laborer working on your project, or, your AP clerk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like it because, like you said, it focuses on the outcome or the result, and not necessarily all the little specific details of like getting there. And sure, you may have some systems and some best practices and things that you expect in terms of specific tasks, but in general, as long as you get that result, do you really care, how you get there? And so they always say, if you have more autonomy, then you feel more fulfilled. And so this is a great way to kind of bridge some of that gap too, is giving your team more control over how they get to the end result, as long as you're getting there. And so, yeah, I really like that. I want to shift gears a little bit, because when it comes to the topic of team building, I always flash back to kind of the early years of building my team. And I remember one of the things that went through my head, and I would imagine this happens to a lot of small business owners, is, okay, maybe you're a team of one, right? It's just you, and you go to make that first hire. The question was always, why would somebody want to follow me, or why would somebody want to join my cause, or, my company and what I'm doing? Because you always have this tendency, I feel like, to compare yourself to other companies that are further along, or, whatever it may be, they're bigger and they have more team members, more benefits, more things they can provide. So, do you have any advice or maybe some tips for people that are in those like very early stages of building their team, and how can you foster kind of a unique environment, or kind of get people on board with what you're trying to do?
I absolutely do. It's funny because I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday who just started his business about a year ago. And there's two things I would say. One is create systems and processes so that there is a consistency in how things are done. There's nothing, so first of all, it's going to do two things. One is it's going to build the foundation on which your company can actually grow, because then it's your way and your standards of doing things, as opposed to whatever somebody brings to the table. Not like you don't want people's input and contribution, because you do, right? But the more you have a consistent set of practices around what you do, and systems that are documented, then the more somebody can actually walk into your organization and feel like, oh, okay, there's a process for, let's say it's change orders, right? So there's a way that we do change orders that serves a whole bunch of different purposes. It serves the purpose of being able to stay in clean communication with our client, to keep them apprised of the impact of what's going to happen on their job. It keeps us in front of making sure that we're not losing money on change order work. It creates a system of rigor about how we manage to the budget within a project, right? So there's lots of different benefits. And honestly, it's like, for all the contractors listening, there should be a really strongly managed change order process in your business, because that's one of the places contractors lose a lot of money. So like by having a consistent set of practices around that and managing to it consistently, like holding your team accountable to it, being in communication about it, having that process documented, making sure that you hold that standard, there's a couple different things that happen then. One is that person who's working for you knows and can count on, well, that's the way that we do it. And that what you're doing is you're setting a standard that's a higher standard than did I remember it? Was it, it was whatever the flavor of the week is. Those words keep coming to mind because I know sometimes we think that it's like whatever the next shiny object is that we learned about, or, the next great, like, oh, aha, we're going to do this. And so you implement all these things and then they last for about a week and then you forget that you implemented and your team goes, every time your team hears, and we've all worked in these environments, right? Where like your team goes, yeah, a week from now, he's going to forget about it. So we'll just wait and see. We're not actually going to do it. And then if he doesn't see anything, right, that we like, well, it's going to go away. So choose, and it's not like, I'm not talking about dozens of things. Over time, it will be dozens of things. But as you're starting out, put a stake in the ground about what are the most critical ways that you're going to be in business that are going to produce because you're in contracting, which is the whole game of contracting is on time, on budget, as promised. So a good change order process is going to make sure that happens, right? So I would orient certain processes that they're in procedures and standards that you have around that. There's a couple of things that happen when you do that, is that A, you have happier clients, B, you end up not losing money on change orders, let's say, and C, when you create that kind of environment where there's that rigor with the people that you work with, people are starved for it. People love to work for companies that have their stuff together. Really, like those companies, those are the companies that have people calling them when other people are having a hard time finding employees. Those companies are the ones that have a reputation of they got their act together, they're well run, I know what I can count on. They can feel a sense of trust in being in your business and working with you. So that would be the first thing. And there's one other thing that I would add to all of that is keep your agreements. Do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. If you make that a standard in your business, and it's hard, those are easy words to say, but like when we say we're going to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning for a meeting, we're there at 8 o'clock, whether it's with my client or my team. When we say that we're going to have a bid out by Tuesday at noon, it's out by Tuesday at noon. And that doesn't mean 1 o'clock. Now, stuff happens in life, but if you renegotiate agreements before they're broken agreements, it's a way that you start to have integrity in your words. And again, I'll say some of the most successful companies I work with are ones that the most successful companies I know of are ones who operate with integrity about keeping their word.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And in thinking about kind of what you were saying, if you have these documented processes and you do what you say you're going to do, that can start to attract people to you. I guess how do you do that as you're going to make that first hire, second or third hire, and you're still a small team, and somebody's kind of looking from the outside in? I know right now, like the labor challenge is large, I guess, and people are struggling to find good help. And how do you showcase that that's the type of company you are, prior to somebody actually like interviewing and saying, yeah, I'm on board with this company, I want to join you guys?
So there's a couple of things I would say. One is, what I notice is that clients that I work with that in this environment where it's hard to find people, have people calling them looking for a job. It's usually because their team is talking about what a great company it is, and other subcontractors and other general contractors and other trades are talking about what a great company it is to work for, and their clients. So when you build that kind of environment, people talk about it. People are like, yeah, like, wow, Joe's company is amazing. So that's one way to do it. The other thing that I would say is that when you interview people, you are prepared, and that you come, you reflect in that interview process that rigor and that discipline. So you come to the conversation with not just, I'm going to talk about my company for an hour, but I come prepared with interview questions that I want to know about you, and I want to make sure it's a right fit. Like that you bring your cultural conversation to the party when you're interviewing with people. And maybe, you have it's like you wouldn't go to a sales conversation without leaving, ideally, a packet behind that says, let me tell you a little bit about our company, about our process. Let me give you some referrals. Let me tell you about how we manage change orders. Let me tell you about how we manage schedule, like something like that. So it's a little different, obviously, if it's an employee, but you might have like a one sheet of, here's some information about our company, and here's what we believe, and here's how we think about our relationship and our partnership with you. So I would say those two things. You get people, when you build a culture where it's a great place to work, other people will talk about you. But when you come up in an interview, be prepared and ask good questions that are open-ended questions, and make sure that you approach the conversation. And I say this to interviewees all the time. This is a two-way conversation. I'm super interested in knowing if this is a right fit for this company, but I'm also super interested in knowing if this is a right fit for you. And so I want to just get clear before we begin this conversation. This isn't about you passing some test. This is really about you and I having a conversation that's an exploration and a discovery about that. That's a different approach. And come prepared with interview questions already established, and then have something to leave them with.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, I think a lot of times what I've discovered is a lot of companies too, they'll maybe just go through one interview and they'll make a hire. And so if you have, maybe a series of interviews, even if it's just you and you're doing all the interviewing and they're going to meet with you 2 or 3 times, that can start to set you apart, and that person sees, wow, they really care about the type of person that they're bringing on.
Absolutely.
They start to get more invested. So, and I like the idea of using the leave behind. It's typically, you see that in sales, but it's a great, little tip, because that immediately separates you, because nobody does that. Right?
Nobody does that. And you're in a sales environment when it comes to employees these days, right? Because
totally.
There's more demand than there is supply.
Yeah, good point.
An interesting statistic, a headhunter said to me not long ago, she goes, 80% of the people who come back to me after an interview tell me that the company, the person I was interviewing with, talked way more than I did and barely asked me any questions. Crazy. And I just thought, wow, right there is your indicator about why you end up hiring people who are not a right fit. Do you have a process in place whereby you ask really good questions?
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of expanded our hiring process over the years too, and because we realize it's one of the most difficult things, and you really want to get to know that person before you bring them on. I mean, people go through 5 to 7 interviews here, before they come on board. And not saying that you have to do 5 to 7, but to your point, the point of having them in the interview is to ask them questions. And sure, you want to be able to sell your company a little bit, but part of how you do that, I think, is asking good questions anyway. Mm-hmm. So,
well, yeah, and open-ended questions. So not mm-hmm. yes, no questions, but open-ended questions like, tell me about how, if I'm interviewing, let's say, a foreman, tell me, how do you plan ahead on a project?
Totally. Yeah.
See what happens. Listen, right? That's a very open-ended question, but it's gonna get you quality information about how does that person think, and how do they plan, and how do they structure their time, and so on and so forth, as opposed to, do you plan ahead on your projects? Those are two completely different questions.
Yeah, I think so. So let's fast forward a little bit. Let's move into the future and say, we've been doing a good job of working on hiring and training good people, and now we've got kind of this dream team. I know you kind of talk about building a dream team. What can it look like if you start to implement these things and you really, hire on people where you have that partnership mentality like you talked about, and you're setting good expectations and outcomes, and you have systems in place and training, and you're attracting the type of people you want? What does that start to look like?
Well, let me just say that what all of us want when we start our business, and even as in leadership positions, what we want is be able to make more money, have more time in our day, and to be able to love what we do again. And doing all of this is your most direct path to being able to have all of that. So when you build great team, when you hire and attract A players, when you build a culture where great people the kind of environment where great people want to work, because you have that discipline within your company, it's the keys to the kingdom. There's your freedom right there. Not long ago, so I have this client that when I first started working with them, it was two partners. They were working 50, 60 hours a week. Neither of them ever had more than a 2-week vacation at a time, nor were able to take off even that much time during any one year. They could never be away from the business at the same time, and they were not making the kind of money that they wanted to make. And they had a crew of like 20 people. And we put this process in place with them of first identifying, okay, so how can we raise the tide? How can we have people take more ownership and accountability? How can we put position agreements in place with your team and get really clear about what's the standards and create certain standards and processes within your business and start to set goals and get clear about what's the trajectory that you and they want to be on. Fast forward, last year, they both were gone at the same time. Major breakdown happened on a project, and neither of them had to come back to the business to take care of it. Their superintendent totally handled the problem, made the client happy, and all was well. They both took off over 3 weeks last year. Again, one of them was an overlapping week, not a problem at all within their business. They're making more money than they've ever made in their entire 15 years before that in their business. And one of the owners said to me not long ago, she goes, I love what I do more than I ever have in my business. And I'm like, that's what it should be. Like, that was why we started out with the great American dream to start with, which is I want to go hang my own shingle, or I want to, be a leader, and I want to rise up within an organization so that I can have more choices.
Yeah.
How great is that?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the way you get back, I like how you phrase it, get back to loving what you do. It seems like you start out loving what you do, and that's why you get into your own business. You say, great, I love doing this. And then you realize very quickly as you grow, you're getting into things that maybe you didn't know that you needed to do or you don't love, which could be managing a team and people and building systems and processes and all these things that come along with it. And then suddenly that's where you're spending all your time and you're not actually doing the thing that you love. Right. And so I like how you phrased it, because when you get to that spot where you have more time, then you can actually focus on the things that you love. So brings us full circle.
Yeah. And I just want to add one other thing about that, Spencer, too, because the thing that people struggle with is that we are not taught leadership skills. We're not taught how to grow a team. And so, that often is the biggest struggle that so many new business owners have. And it's the part that you end up hating, because it's like, I don't know what I don't know. Sure. And so when you can start to unlock those keys for yourself and start to see how to create, the systems, the structure, the tools around managing with people, and tap into that whole thing of people's sense of wanting to belong, matter, make a contribution by doing, putting those systems in place. Now you've just risen the tide to a whole different level of, how you're working with people. And you have the access to getting away from that thing that frustrates us so much.
Yeah, totally. So I got a few more questions for you, but we talk a lot about team and leadership. What's something that everyone should know that maybe we haven't touched on so far?
I guess the other thing is follow through and feedback. So once you've set the structure and you've said, okay, so here's, the position agreement that we put in place, you agreed to, I agreed to, these are the, this is the criteria for success. You need to make sure that you have a structure in place whereby you and they are managing and communicating about that and being consistent about it. So if you say, you're going to have schedules done every week, you're meeting about schedules every week. You're not just going, oh, did you do that? Or hoping and wishing and abdicating it to that person. So our job as leaders is to be in consistent communication and have a structure whereby we do that and do it consistently. So I'd say that's number one, super important to be able to build and grow a team, is to have that discipline with your team internally. And then just in treating it just like a customer meeting or a sales meeting, right? You wouldn't just blow it off. Don't blow off your team meetings either. And then I would say the second thing is feedback. People are starved for feedback. They want to know how they're doing. So whether that's making sure that it's in those meetings, but also doing regular reviews every 6 months or a year at the very furthest out. But also if there's something that's not working, have the conversation, go address it right now, build that level of communication and honesty within your organization. That's another really key thing. All the subversive stuff that happens within organizations that becomes like an infectious disease for all the things that don't get communicated can destroy a business. So keeping it clean, and like, if there's an elephant in the room, go address it. You know, if there's a problem with a team member, go have the conversation. And it doesn't mean, here's the problem. It's like, we're so conflict adverse sometimes, and we have a tendency to not want to have what I call the hard conversations where we're being honest with someone. But what ends up happening is people don't have those conversations, and then we stew and stew and stew. And then one day it's like, I can't take it anymore, and like blow up, right? Now you've just had a much harder conversation than if you'd have just gone, like somebody just, a story comes to mind. Last week, somebody said to me, you know, this person that's working for me was like so great when they started, and they were like just on top of it all the time. And then, you know, the last month they've been like so off their game. And I said, so have you gone and talked to him? And he goes, no, I don't know what to say. And I go, just go say that. Like, just meet it where it is. You don't have to make somebody wrong to have an honest and open conversation called, hey, this just really, like, what's going on? This, like, you know, you seem to be off your game, or this isn't working, or we have a continually broken agreement with each other about not doing what we say we're going to do. You know, something's got to give. What's going on? So just like that ability to be in open, honest conversation and have that continual feedback loop, I would say, is the other thing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And yeah, it's those little things that if you just have the conversation in the moment, you realize, oh, they were having a rough day or something was going on in their personal lives, and you know, but then it suddenly becomes something that, like you said, it grows and grows, and then it blows up later. So
right, yeah.
I think that's great advice. And I've got our last segment of the show coming up. But before we get to that, how can people connect with you or learn more about what you do and how you help?
You could go to my website at suiterbusinessbuilders.com. It's SUITER businessbuilders.com.
Cool.
And
Easy
on
enough.
there is information about me and the courses I offer, and information about my book and all that.
Cool. And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes as well for everybody. And now we're going to get into our segment of the show. We call it the Fast Five. So I'm going to hit you with 5 rapid fire questions, and just say whatever comes to mind. So first one, kind of a easy lob, but what's your favorite business book and why?
My favorite business book is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And it's my favorite book because he talks about the thing that I was just talking about a minute ago, is how do you build a culture where there's honesty, there's a deep sense of commitment to not being subversive in a team. And really, it's written as a parable. I love the way that he writes this book. And he just talks about the story of this team and how they went from being very dysfunctional with each other to really building this deep level of trust. And in the process, not everybody made it, but what it gives us some great examples. And he's got great stuff in the book about how do you actually start to shift that culture within your organization of being one where great people want to work, and that is open and honest and a trusting environment.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great one. And next question would be, who is the most inspirational person in your life?
I'm going to try to do this without crying. I would say it's my mom. Um, she's no longer with me, but she was super courageous, and she, she was just an amazing woman, and super courageous and super willing to go beyond her level of comfort in life in order to support her family.
That's awesome. Very cool. And favorite, or if you could have one superpower, what would that be?
Superpower. I guess it would be to be able to to be able to instantly be in different places, like immediately.
Awesome. Yeah. So maybe teleporting or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. That one is actually the one that I would choose as well. I think
Is it?
a lot of people pick flying, but I think teleporting you can kind of accomplish
Yeah. There's
flying if
moments
you
when,
really
like,
want.
call
So.
me from far away, and I'm like, oh, I just want to be there and give them a hug.
Yeah, totally. All right. So next question is describe yourself in 3 words.
I would say soft, kind, and strong.
Awesome. And last question is if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say be authentic. Find your authentic voice. The people that you work with, whether it's clients or it's your employees, it's like at a fundamental level, we all want the same thing. And when we can drop down into our own humanity when we're communicating with somebody else, and that honesty thing, that we can get a lot more done with people.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, Vicki, thanks so much for joining me today. This was awesome. I love talking about team building. So
this was great, Spencer. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You did a great job. So thanks. It was fun.
All right. Thanks, Vicki.
I hope you found today's video helpful. If you're ready to take your next step in your leadership journey and to build a great contracting business, I encourage you to check out my book, The Profit Bleed. It's full of great tools and resources that will help you implement the processes and the systems and the structure that will allow you to build a more profitable business, allow you to work less hours, and help you reclaim the joy and fun in your business and in your life again. And for a limited time, you can get my book for free. All you have to do is pay $7.95 shipping and handling. And you simply need to go to theprofitbleed.com/free. Thanks again for joining me for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Profit Builder.